with Harriette M. Roberts of 1724 Sherwood, Williamston, Michigan 48895. Harriet's phone number is area code 517-655-3547. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River in Lansing on November 8th, 1990. This is tape number 1 of 2 tapes. Harriet, if you would just start, please, with your name and your address and your phone number for us, please.
My name is Harriette Roberts, and I live at 1724 Sherwood in Williamston, Michigan. The phone number is area 517-655-3547.
What's your zip over there?
48895. That's for everybody
Yeah.
in Williamston, little town.
Now, if you would just take us back to when you started, where you started, and what was going on,
Okay.
and so forth.
I was, my service date is 12/1/63, but I had 1 year at the corporation, at General Motors in Detroit, called the corporation. And I worked there during negotiations and labor relations under Freddie Schwartz and George Morris. And we went through, I worked for the IUE management group particularly. And, you know, that is peculiar to General Motors, but it was their negotiation. And we had none from Oldsmobile in the IUE group, but I think they would have been represented, and there were some other people working. Well, at the end of that year, I asked to be transferred to Lansing, which came about like January 65. So that's when I came here and had interviewed in several places, but the person who hired me in that department was Fritz Bennett in public relations. So I worked there 2 years, and I was the clerical support, and Helen Jones at that time worked for Fritz, and there was George Egbert, Monty Childs, Jerry O'Neill came in at a later point, and the other person on that staff was a fellow photographer by the name of Woodhouse. I forget his name. Woodhouse. Yeah, right. Okay. And so it was a wonderful job. You know, I felt coming in from a corporation in a big city, Detroit, coming into this town, Lansing and Oldsmobile per se, very like a family oriented sort of thing. Everybody was very cooperative. They were just nice people. Not that other people weren't, but it was a flavor that I enjoyed and took to it like a duck to water.
You could actually see a difference.
Oh, yes. Oh, definitely, because the General Motors building was also housing other like doctors' offices and different businesses, so you didn't get the cohesiveness. I mean, you had a department here and a department on another floor, and within your own staff, you know, the people were all nice, great folks, but you would just know those within your staff. But over here, you've got in one area, everybody who was here, and I was at the main plant, and then as I got into it, and then I knew there was somebody else in another plant and other people. And then but I'll tell you about that later. But when I was hired, we were in Building 60, that old, beautiful building. Whereabouts
in the building? You remember where you were?
Yeah, second floor. second floor, and I'm getting deja vu because I'm going back. I'm reaching back, and we were.
See, now the second floor was that what you would call the lobby floor or the one
No,
above that?
the lobby floor was downstairs. They went up those big marble stairs.
Okay.
And then we'd have to go up one flight.
Okay.
I'm sure that's what it was because I remember we were down the hallway. Across was some accounting department, and down the hall was Jack White's office with Betty Libby.
Okay. Was the general manager on that floor with you?
Yes,
Okay.
and that
Was he down at the other end?
he was down at the other end, and his secretary was Jerry Radke, and I think at that time it was what, Wolfram? Wolfram?
63.
64, 65. It would be really beginning of 65. No, it was Wolfram. I remember that. And she worked
Yeah, I think
for
it
him.
was.
Yeah. And I would sometimes, have to sit in for Betty and answer the phones. And
At that point in time, even?
Jack White was just a wonderful person, and so was Mr. Bennett's. And we'd put out news releases and all this kind of thing.
Okay.
That was heavy typing. That was before the days of computers. How did we survive? But it was fun. And Monty, a lot of telephone work.
Okay.
And Monty dealt with the tours
Okay.
that went through the plants. And then, of course, I remember it would be, I'd have to tell and answer the phones, no children under 10 years old because of the safety hazard.
Okay.
And that was a big thing, and you'd always worry about somebody would be bringing their child in.
Yeah.
And he would take the tours, and it was like a record, and now they, I'm sure, use records, but at the time I was the quote unquote record, and I would say, the tours between blah, 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 and blah, 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 and they'd go through, and George would deal with news releases, as did Jerry, and then the pictures by Woolhouse would be anything that would have meaning, or if he'd have to go out in the plant to shoot, like, I guess he would go into like safety areas too. He was the photographer.
Yes.
So after we were in there a year, I believe, and then they built the new building, and then we had to move.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a nice, beautiful building, but when we saw that other building torn down, it was sort of just a piece of history and there must have been good reason for it, but I didn't feel the building was that old. I think it was built somewhere in the 50s.
Oh, it was built
in the 30s?
29.
All right, 29. Oh, that's right, because I thought, gee, that's not that much older than I am, and I thought buildings should last, and they had that glory, the innards of the building were not very good because the flimsy partitions and the offices, but that basic structure with the stairway and all that was great. And of course, to my mind's eye, it was different probably from an engineer's standpoint, but beside the point, that's all gone.
Did you come through the front door when you came to work of Building 60, or how'd you get in the building? You remember?
I don't remember that, but we would have had to park. We would have had to park in the back, so I probably would have come in the back or somewhere we would have parked. I don't know where. It was always a hassle parking even then in those years. No, I kind of think we came in the back because we would, several of us would go out to lunch, and then we'd come in and it'd be the stairway, and Marion Crows was the receptionist even then. And, or she was pardon me, I retract that, she was operator, because they housed also the telephone operators. And with her voice, you could always pick her out, and her voice just, we knew it, and you would always hear her voice, even in the background for the operator. That's right. And then I think there was the receptionist area. And the receptionist, at least in Building 70, was Betty. I forget her last name, but I see her. I visualize her, and she's still around. But anyway, when we had moved in, we had very nice offices in 70, and Bennett's had that corner office, which overlooked.
What floor?
fifth floor. And then Betty and Jack White went up to the 6th floor, of course, the executive level. And he had a nice office too. And Helen had her office right outside of Mr. Bennett's. And then by then, Egbert was gone, retired.
Retired. Yeah.
And Monty was still there, and Woolhouse was gone, and Jerry was there, or Jerry might have been gone, I'm not sure. But we had a Jim Williams come in at that point, and he was PR, and he's still around. I think he's at Chevrolet heading the PR there. Yeah, then he went, for a while he went into sales, but I think probably if you saw him, you know. And my office was right inside the door, and we had all those files of the history. And Helen, even then, was very, very, very active and interested in helping people out who called and asked for a picture of the front end of a 1929 or whatever year they requested. And I got into that, some of it, but she largely handled that. And after, see, I was in PR for 2 years.
Okay.
And then there was the cutback. And I must have been just naive in those days, you know. I mean, I just didn't even realize what was happening until Mr. Bennett called me in and said, you know, they have to cut their staff and blah, blah. Well, you know, I mean, it's like, tell me again, you know what? I mean, I got a job here. You know, I just didn't understand all of this stuff. I wasn't in administration. But he said, you know, you'll be going out on interviews. And lo and behold, if I didn't go out, and I never thought that I wouldn't have a job. I mean, but some people, it ended up that way, you know, some people didn't have. Yeah. But, you know, as I say, in my naivete, I just didn't think that would happen. Of course, I couldn't because I was my own support. You know, I mean, it's like, well, I mean, that's just the way it is. I have to have a job. But anyway, when I interviewed at Plant 2, I was interviewed by Bill Mounds.
All right.
And the job was secretary to the general superintendent, who was Elmer Corbin.
Oh, all right.
So that puts me probably in about 1966, 67, I would say. So I was hired for that position, and
now were you replacing somebody there?
There was a gal retiring, and her name was Schneider was her last name. Dorothy. Now I don't know if Dorothy is still around, but she was there, and I don't know where she came from, but she was not. She was happy to retire. Let me put it that way. And so she kind of trained me for a couple of days.
So you actually had a little bit of overlap time.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but it did. And but she was very anxious to get out of there and retire. And she said to me, "All these people here," say that, but she was, you know, she just was happy to go. And there was the offices, and this was again on the 2nd floor. I was probably in better shape then, because I'd walk up the stairs. The elevator was the pits. I mean, you thought you were in dungeon. You'd take so long, you could run up 3 times before the elevator. But the offices were glass, and my office was between the general superintendents and Mouts, who was the master mechanic.
Okay, so you were between Corbin and Mouts.
Right. And his office had, I remember that, what I call bathroom glass, that frosting. Yeah, and you couldn't see through it. But the other rest was all clear. You could see right down through to departments. And that, I felt, began a real love affair for me. I loved that plant, and they loved me. I mean, it was just obvious. And I was one of the few women, and all the hourly would come walking past, and I usually had my door open. And so I got to know a lot of wonderful people.
No, you had never been, quote, in a plant.
No, not as such. No. Although my beginnings, my father was a job setter in a plant, but I don't recall ever going to he worked at Dodge in Detroit. But I was very comfortable in that setup, and I know they were comfortable with me, and I was kind of their darling, and it was just great, you know. I mean,
Did you get to wander around out in the shops?
oh,
Delivering
I
or
get
taking?
sometimes, no, not really, but I did go, you know, go down on it. Was like into the dye room. You know, I could see the big machinery
Yeah,
and things like
yeah.
that. But, you know, even then we were busy. I didn't have a lot
Yeah.
of sit down time.
Yeah.
And if I did, I had to work fast to make it up. But I would go maybe down into differential area into
Okay.
the offices, and you could kind of oversee some of the plants. But I was not aware of what this machine did or that machine
Yeah.
did and that sort of thing.
No, but the differential plant was there at that point.
Differential plant, they changed heads. The superintendent, when I left, was Houghton, Harold Houghton.
Okay.
And the dye room was headed by Steve Spivak, or Sivak, Steve Sivak, who died. That was tragic. And then we had the cold or the scrap utilization program. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
You were, I had met you out there, Jim. And that was headed under Mounts, and specifically headed by Ralph McNitt and his group. And then I was taken with hard hat and glasses and all to see that whole operation of the. That was fantastic.
And I suppose that was the first time you'd ever seen a steel mill.
Yes, really, it was, and the heat was intense. And we had to walk on rafters, you know, and I said, well, if I get burned, you guys are going to get it, all this stuff. Well, and of course, nothing happened except because of the heat, and this is just a little personal thing I'm remembering right now, I had gotten like a cold sore.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it was the heat that brought this out. Now, I mean, it was just awful, but, you know, I mean, it's just a vanity type of thing. And I'm sure that's what, you know, the heat would have brought that out.
What were your impressions of the place?
I was fascinated. I couldn't, I mean, just to see this hot metal come through and then come out. I mean, I just loved it. I mean, the impression was that it was massive, a pulsating a type of, it was just an activity that was enormous and it was very emotional.
I'll be darned.
I mean, it's just fantastic. I mean, these people working and then the men working, well, you could see they were hot. And it was just great to see. It was just a wonderful accomplishment, I think, of man. Because I appreciate more of the natural beauty, but this you couldn't help but appreciate if you had any ounce of appreciation of anything, of accomplishment. It was wonderful. So that was great. And anyway, I worked there. I met a lot of the men from, you know, from the ranks, just by virtue of the fact that they walked by their officer, they'd have to come in because we would then have to put foremen on it. This was when we would put, I handled everything, you know, the personnel work, and then just sent the papers over. If someone had to be put on a temporary situation, we'd put the foreman on, and then I'd kind of watch and go after these guys and say, well, you owe me this paperwork, you owe me this and all, but they loved it, and, you know, so, yeah, right. And it was all done very nicely. We had the cafeteria right in, not too far away from the office, so there was a lot of activity, and sometimes if the activity got too much, I had to close my door because I couldn't stand the noise. But I made a lot of good friends and good contacts, and that was wonderful because the one day I remember I saw a mouse.
Running in the office?
Oh, well, of course. And I closed Mr. Corbin's door, and underneath I saw this little, I thought it was like rubber, you know, and I'm a city girl, you know, I don't handle that. And I looked, and it was the flap of the mouse, and oh, yowie. So I go into my office and I call Joe Masner, he was head of maintenance, and I said, Joe, get me exterminators. I said, come on up here quick. There's a mouse in the office. And I'm sitting on my chair because I don't want my feet on the floor, and I closed his other door. So, well, I'm upset about this, and I waited about half a minute, and Joe was way at the other end of the plant, of course. And I said, Joe, you're not here. I said, hurry up, blah, 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 the mouse. So he came up and I don't know, I must have been, 3 minutes, but I thought it was awful. And I was cramped because I was, sitting. And finally he came in and he's laughing. He just thought that was a great, I said, get that mouse. And they caught it. He said, it's just a little baby mouse. Yeah, right. I said, well, I don't care. I don't want it here. He just thought that was the greatest, funniest thing. But the group, the people there were great. There's just no question. And now, since I left, of course, the people aren't there anymore. Yeah, it did. And I don't know that I'd even recognize, or they wouldn't even know who I was at this point. But Elmer Corbin was one of the old type of managers, and he felt there was always more than one way to do it. Not very critical, but I guess he could be of me. He wasn't there. This is your job. You do it, and I did it. I know I didn't fail these guys, but I guess he could be tough when he had to be out in the plant. And there was also Bud Miller, who worked for Elmer, and then who else was there? Harold Houghton, Bud Miller. They were two. I forget what Bud did. Forge.
He must.
Yeah, he had the forge. Yeah, and then what was down there? There were some of the engineers, and under Mouts was the scrap utilization, and what else was there? You used to come and visit those engineers.
Yeah, they were all the process guys for
the
axle or the differential plant.
Well, both Mr. Mouts and Mr. Corbin have since deceased, and
no, Harriet, was Corbin there for your whole stay, or did that?
Corbin retired.
Okay, while
I was there. I remember typing his letter of resignation, which was hard. I mean, he was fantastic. And then Mouts was still there when I left. Subsequent to Corbin came Judd Cordes. And I was very lucky to get Judd as a boss. And he was lucky to have me. I always tell him, I told him that because I was his first female secretary.
Oh, really?
He had a clerk. Clerk. And good ones,
Yeah.
But I told him that I trained him right. But he was an excellent boss, and I still keep in touch with he and his wife.
Can you contrast between the two, the Corbins and the Cordesons?
Yeah, I would say they were different in their reign, if you want to call it that. Elmer had already, I never called him Elmer, incidentally. It was, I always call Mr. But when Judd came, he wanted me to call him Judd, which was fine. I did, but my personal training is not,
Didn't feel quite right.
No. Yeah. Until as you get to be an old war horse, then all kinds of things are fine. But Mr. Corbin, and he'd go out in the plant, and he would, however he handled that, I didn't know. But he would have meetings, and he would discuss the problems, and they would do that. I never heard him raise his voice, but I'm sure I heard stories that he could, but never to me. Judd was more of a strict disciplinarian when he came in. And he would ask somebody to do something, and they would, and then he'd ask again, and they didn't do it. And by the third time, he would be upset. He'd say, look, if you're not going to do it, let me know, and then I'll handle another way, or you just do this and this, and we'll get along fine. But he could be very, very firm, which he needed to be, at that point. So he came in with a different set of goals and whatever, the main goal being, to produce what you needed to produce in high quality. And they both were very well respected, very well loved people by the ranks. And I enjoyed working for Judd. He was, we got along well, and because I did whatever he needed to make his job easier. And I certainly enjoyed working for Mounts, and we were all relaxed with each other, and I think that's the important thing. There was no uptightness, and if something happened that was not good, we could sit down and talk about it.
Did you tend to get a lot of direction from afar, so to speak, from the main plant, or didn't that?
No, not really,
didn't get
Jim.
much of that?
I mean, the direction would be like things that I had to supply. Now, what direction they got themselves, I wasn't privy to, but what they would have gotten from the Truxels and the Moonies and
That's what I was wondering, if
on
those
down.
individuals came over.
They
there,
did,
or
yes.
just-
Yeah,
just-
they did. They were there, and especially when we went into the scrap utilization, there were a lot of people around looking. And Mr. Cook would come when he was manufacturing, he'd come in. So from that vantage point, I really got to meet a lot of the people. Your department would be around there. And what was my train of thought? Oh, the direction that I would get would be mostly the paperwork that I'd have to fill out, reports that I'd have to put in, all that wonderful, exciting stuff. And then I forget how many years, but I would have worked and, kept on enjoying, even with Judd there. Then Mr. Cook had come in to the plant, and he was looking for a vacation replacement for the 6th floor. And this would have been, let's see, I think I was at the plant 8 years. That was a good enough time.
Okay.
And then he interviewed me for that job. And it was,
So he was manufacturing manager.
he was general
General
manufacturing manager. And who worked for him was, who she was.
His secretary at that time, was that Janet?
Yeah,
Carroll?
Janet Carlton and Hendy. And then, so I'd float around,
Okay.
which was okay, but I didn't have my own kitchen sink, so to speak.
But weren't you still responsible back at plant 2?
No.
Oh, okay.
I was gone from plant 2,
Somebody
and
filled your shoes over there.
they hired another gal, and I can't remember who followed me. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
But then, so you just
I floated
bounced
around.
and bounced
Yeah,
and bounced.
I know. And this, I think I did for a year or so, and it was all right. I mean, I got to know different people and different jobs, but as I say, I didn't have my kitchen sink. But I'm not complaining.
Well, did you
This is
spend
just-
most of your time over in 70 then? After that? Oh,
Most
okay.
of it was at 70, and then if Janet was on vacation, then I'd sit there, and then. But when I think about it, I also went to plant 3.
Okay.
I remember filling in. I don't really know why the position was there, but anyway, I filled in for everybody, and it would be like you get what 4 or 5 weeks, so that took up a lot of time.
Yeah.
And then again another cut came. So there goes. Yeah,
74,
yeah,
right.
So there goes Harriette, they're, oh my gosh. But anyway, that's when I went out to Building 40 and worked for Jim Logan. And that was a fun job, but it was, by then I felt really closed in, as far as progress or anything of that nature. But again, I met wonderful folks there, and I had a good time. I wasn't there very long. I'd say less than 2 years it would have been. And I subsequently had followed Eleanor.
She had retired?
Yeah, she had retired. So I'd had her job.
Hard act to follow.
Yeah, really. And then, because I kind of wanted to do my own thing, and I'm not, she was a strong personality, but I am too, and I did my own thing. But, I got through that, and then I worked then my next job assignment was Ken Knight.
Okay, so you went back to Building
I
70?
went back to Building 70.
Now, did the Building 40 relationship seem much different than the other
70,
places that you had been?
The Building 40, because the bulk of my experience was Plant 2. And yes, it was a different flavor, but not negatively so. I mean, it was.
Was the pace different, or was the demands or that sort of stuff any different than what you had been previously involved with?
Well, I would say it was more of a different level in that pace-wise, everybody was working in the demands, but it was different. They weren't dealing with producing a product. It was paperwork type of thing. Your engineers, and there was typing and that sort of thing. Then I'd have to walk around with the mail, which I felt was a waste of time. Here I am, sorting. Okay, so here I was sorting mail and delivering it, and that would drive me crazy because I felt it, was kind of a male job. Maybe someone else who had, of a different level should have been doing that. Not that I was a snob, I did it, but I felt I could have been utilizing my time better. But nonetheless, I did the job, and I didn't really have a lot of different things to do other than, take care of my boss and his needs and do the typing, and then the engineers would bring some typing. And,
personnel kinds of work?
No,
didn't have
none
any
of that.
Stuff.
So it wasn't as diversified. And then when the Knight's job opened up, and I was hired for that, and I worked for him less than 2 years, I believe. And he was out a great deal in Building 40, so that was kind of a lonely job because I would have to open up his mail and take the mail and answer letters and that sort of thing. Again, it was a job like he reported to Mooney. And then, but I was able to pick up other work,
Were
it's
you
not
as busy
no,
there as
I
you
was
had been
not.
elsewhere?
No, right. And I think because of the demands, the activity and all, when you get into a job that isn't as demanding, then you're sort of wondering what else you can do. But none of the jobs that I had been on, would I say, were not good jobs. I mean, they all were fantastic. They all were good to me. And you just met different kinds of people. I was able to, by comparison, meet the rank and file.
Yeah.
Wonderful, great, this is your core. And I was able to meet the engineers, and I was able to meet management and go up on high, I mean, to me, they all seem the same. They just happen to have different jobs. I don't think that I could say one was lesser or more important than the other. They just had different assignments. And that's how I always felt personally. And,
were there up on the 6th floor of 70 where there's considerably more what I'll call ruckuses going on than there had been like in 40 and
Oh my
plant
God, no, no, no,
2?
no. Not ruckuses. I mean, it was all very sedate, and in
No.
fact, it's people, because of the lighting and all, it was executive offices, people would
Yeah.
almost come in hushed, well, I'm not a hush kind of person. I probably made more noise than anybody,
Yeah.
but, in the offices, I'm sure they had their meetings and, poking the eyes and well, blah, blah, whatever they
Yeah.
did. But the gals there all got along well, and, we were a good group. And,
Did you guys all share each other's phone answering or how did that
there
work?
were some, I would be able to pick up at that point Janet's, and she was able to pick up mine. And then, who was down the line?
Fader.
Yeah, he was, Ray. See that, but I remember sitting in there when I was on the vacation replacement job, sitting in for Truxell, sitting in, because Knight wasn't there at that
Yeah.
point, sitting in for Cook, sitting in for, who was the manager then?
Rollis?
No, there was Rowlis, would it have been Metzel?
Well, oh, the general manager?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
see,
was
I
either
never,
Metzel or Belts or Howard Carroll, one of those people.
it was Howard Carroll,
Yeah.
I'm sure, because he followed Belts, but I never had to sit in over there. And, but it was just I think of all the jobs that I had, that one would have been where I was, like I say, I didn't have my own kitchen sink, and I kind of needed that. And but it was all right. I can't complain. But yes, as far as ruckus, no, it was very, people would come in, and they'd, you could see them just be subdued because of the lighting, and I wanted to go. I was scared, but I didn't. I was trying to be very,
Part of the
go
fixture.
part of the fixture, right? And but it was quiet in a lot of respects, that you didn't have a lot of the activity going on that you had. And like in 40, the relaxation there in plant 2, it's just different. And then from the night job, I went to work for Harold Cutler in personnel. Well, his secretary retired and was retiring, and that was the time, when they would do searches, or all 5 levels, then they would have 5 levels, would you be interested in going to interview? Well, yes, I would, I thought that would be neat. So I did, and I interviewed Cutler, or he interviewed me rather, and I think, and then they have to interview all kinds of people, and then time goes on before they let you know and all. And I was really wanting that job. Number one, then it would have been an executive secretary level, and I always liked personnel, and I thought that was neat. So I did get the job. I was very happy, and
that would have been about when?
well, let's see, 8, 9, 10, 75. Could have been like late 70s.
Okay.
Because I was there in personnel like 10 years.
Okay.
And then Ruth, we had a little overlap time, Ruth Kufal.
Kufal.
And she showed me the things that she had to do. And then I worked for Cutler. Then Cutler retired. Now, let's compare flavors. This was in Building 62.
Okay.
Certainly not fancy like in Building 70. But again, the offices were right there, the personnel office, and the executive office was off the hallway, but everyone was there, and you could, reach out a hand and see somebody or get information. And then the other departments and personnel were housed in other floors or different areas, meaning the plant security. So that opened up a whole new vista for me of Oldsmobile, different parts, the safety, the medical, plant security. I'm probably forgetting a lot of them, suggestions and of course personnel per se, education and all this kind of thing. I found that exciting. And again, the people there were very, very cooperative and they seemed to be a cohesive group. And it isn't that I worked in different places, but I know that anybody could pick up a phone and call a department and say, oh, hey, we're in trouble. We need this right away, printing. And I mean, it'd be done. I mean, people would be willing. And I think you would agree with that kind of, it permeated all of Oldsmobile. And I was always very impressed with that sort of thing. There'd always be someone willing to help you. And, or if you had a question, there'd be anyone would be willing to sit down. You would ask and explain things and just, be willing to give you the information you need. You didn't have to dig and fight and kick and pray and hope that somebody would help you. And it was just a good feeling. And you felt like coming to work, just by virtue of the fact that I moved around as much as I did, I knew a lot of people I could call, like I dropped my keys once down the elevator shaft, and I thought, oh, no, well, how could I have done? It fell through, the crack wasn't very big, 2 inches, and that's where my keys fell, right down there.
I don't know how you did that.
Well, I don't know anyway, but I had to call somebody in plant engineering, and they were there, I mean, nobody complained and said, you dummy, why'd you do that? Because I said it first. I was, but it's all right, no big deal. And then my tenure there lasted with Mr. Cutler until he retired, and he has since deceased. And then I worked for not the remaining, but for the bulk of those years for Jim Lewandowski.
He followed Cutler.
Okay. And so things started to change then with now when did they have that great big? No, it was still Oldsmobile at that point.
Right.
And we used to deal a lot with, by then, the corporation, making personnel, what would you call them, personnel charts for all of Oldsmobile. Okay. That's right. So Oldsmobile was still Oldsmobile at that point. And so we had a lot of dealings with that, and then just dealing with our own departments and
these were
staff.
kind of reports that they demanded, so to
speak. Of Oldsmobile personnel type of thing. And then of course our department was also involved in compensation and the unclassified and the classified group and all that kind of stuff.
See, was this someplace in here we must have got into all the ruckuses on minority and female hiring and all that jazz?
Affirmative action. No, that came in under Cutler. I remember that because he was on the affirmative action. He was on a board, it seemed to me. Yeah. And there was even, I recall, in the file, some he'd put out these notices. I don't know that they do that anymore. But I see now, please don't dump coffee in the water thing. I remember that. But I remember the women, there was a thing about women wearing slacks to the office. Do you remember that?
Oh, that.
Yeah, well then, I guess after a while they were permitted to do that, but I mean, today it would be like, what? I beg your pardon. But by that, at that point, women were directed to do certain things, and the slacks wearing was not one of them.
Wore a dress.
Yeah, dresses or skirts or whatever. And now I think if you walk into Building 70, supposedly administration, you see all kinds of things.
Including blue jeans.
And blue jeans. I know. I went and stopped over there last week, and I had on a pair of slacks and a coat, but under that I had a sweatshirt, and I thought, oh gee, how could I hope nobody sees me this way, you know. So, and then I happened to see a person walking by who looked like she should have been out cleaning her yard, and I thought, oh my gosh, you know how times have changed. But to each his own. But yes, you're right. There was all of that coming up, and that was handled as best as possible. And I didn't detect any, what would you call it? I don't want to say the word negativism, but I didn't detect prejudice. But you know, they went and tried to do the hiring that had to be done to accomplish. But I didn't detect a resentment or a prejudice of either.
In your earlier years, you hadn't seen anything.
No, no, nothing. And I don't know that I could have, had I seen that, couldn't have tolerated it very well. But no, I did not see anything like that. And people were just people, no matter what. And I think that was important to me as a person.
Did you see any difference, Harriet, between how Cutler managed and how Lewandowski managed the
Oh yeah, there was definitely Cutler. Oh, was sort of, I would say, laid back, and you know, and he did his own thing. But Lewandowski was a take charge. You know, he got all the department heads, and he'd have meetings, and you know, he'd say, "Well, we got to accomplish this," and he was a younger, more vibrant leader. And yes, definitely a difference. Mr. Cutler did his job, but he wasn't at that point. I don't know what he was years before. Certainly innovative, you know. And I think when you're by the last few years, you're going out unless you're really hot and fired person all the time. You know, he's just not. He wasn't going to do that. And but he, you know, he'd go through the departments and visit and that sort of thing. But he was not a take charger.
How did they use their quote underlings, their next level in the organization?
Well, Cutler, of course, you know, I guess he delegated a lot to his underlings, one of whom was Lewandowski, and the other was Donahue. He had the two assistants. Donahue handling the labor side of the house. So the labor group would come in and for meetings into Cutler's office, and Jim Lewandowski had the salaried personnel. And then when Jim took over, and that was when Cook was the manager, general manager by then Jim got into everything, and he'd get his department heads going. You know, there's just no question. He was dynamic, and you always knew where you stood with him.
Who replaced him?
Yes, and that'll all come down to my story. Then, because I'm nearing the end, Jim had been assigned another job in the corporation. And he had, so he went to the corporation, and then ultimately he went to Saturn as the human resource vice president. But on the heels of Jim leaving, in comes a fellow by the name of Michael Tierney.
He was not an Oldsmobile person?
No, no. He came from the corporation. And then when Mike came in.
Now, were you still all over in 62?
We were all there in 62. Okay. Then we had that new human resource building built. But prior to that, now weren't we already changing?
Starting to change the organization.
Yeah, and because they were saying, you know, they're trying to eliminate all this top management and get more middle management. And well, I don't know that it ever happened. But that's for another tape. Right. Someone who knows more what they're talking about. I don't, because I was on the fringe. But then Mike came in, and by then process was, and I don't even know if you were involved in the purchase of the land, but I know there was someone in engineering. Yeah, you were gone by then? Gosh, I just can't believe that you were. You've gone ahead of me. But then the land was purchased and the building was refurbished and redone. And then we all moved in there. By then computers were coming in. Even when Jim was there, we were getting computerized a little bit. And that's exciting. I mean, I was born 30 years too soon. I should have been into all this computer stuff. I said to my mother, "No, why didn't you have me as a change of life baby? It would have been great." But all this computer stuff came in, and that is, I think, fascinating. And so we all, most of the departments then were housed in the one Human Resource Center personnel, except Plant Security.
But so you took everything that
We
was over
took
than
everything.
62 hourly and
Yeah.
salary and medical?
Medical also, they're still there. And now I understand that's, they're reporting elsewhere. I don't know, I don't
don't
understand it, and that, I'm not worried about that. But then we came, while Jim was still there, they had an early retirement offer, if you recall. And we lost some people to that. And then when we moved over we got just nice furniture. The place was a state-of-the-art personnel place, and it was great and clean and wonderful, and everybody was happy there. And by then, we were BOC. And Oldsmobile was Oldsmobile, which is still hard for me to, I still think of Oldsmobile as total Oldsmobile, but it's not. And then you get the engine plant and you get all this stuff. So when you cut your teeth on one place, and now I can understand where some old duffers don't like to accept change. No, I'm not an old duffer yet, so I imagine it's a little harder for other people. But I still think of Oldsmobile with very fond memories in my heart. And I love the place, and I always drive Oldsmobiles, and I always will.
What was going on when you were making that change, Harriet? How are people perceiving all that?
Well, I
think about that.
Yeah, I think their perception was positive. Exciting, Are you talking about the physical change?
No, I'm talking more the change from quote Oldsmobile
Oh,
to
okay,
DLC,
yeah,
and
that's
then
what I
now
thought.
that whatever happened, the organization's splitting apart and all that.
Well, I think it was looked on, it certainly by the likes of myself, with some trepidation, well, what's going to happen type of thing, or they're cutting. And I do feel that when this happened, when the cut was made, we lost a little bit of our heart in that people seem to, in all factions, kind of, I don't know if they changed or the climate changed, but no longer could I feel comfortable in calling up a department who was a service department and say, "Hey, I need this," and that. It was like, well, you just kind of have to wait, sort of thing. It wasn't, I don't think the cooperation was there as it was when I first became part of Oldsmobile. And that's just my own small perception now.
But that's from one point of view.
Yeah, but I also, I kind of heard that it's just not the same. And I think something died a little bit, from Oldsmobile. And I mean, we always, hometown car, this sort of thing. And now, it's like, well, if you're going to buy a car, buy the one here that's made over here. And people would, and you'd sit down and order a car. You didn't say how much did that cost. I mean, you never did that. You did this routinely. Well, I'll take this. I'll have that. Sure, yeah, bing, 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 and you'd order a car. And but I think something has happened, and maybe in time it's going to turn. Maybe the pendulum will swing the other way, and you will get back that feeling. But now I'm getting like, oh, things are changed. They're hiring contract personnel, people who are not part and parcel of everything. So, I'm saying that just by observation. I'm not critiquing it because I don't know everything that goes into it, and it's not my affair anymore. And but it sort of was sad to see that, and yet within you do cross the lines, and I think people are generally the same, but I don't know. I think something has happened a little bit with attitude, and that may be part of the reason why we're not selling as many cars. And why they're not, are they putting them together as well? I don't know. I mean, you'd always laugh about don't buy a car that was made on Monday or Friday, and you think, what? Or it's always easy. Well, look at those guys did that. I bought this car and this strip is not quite right, kind of thing. But that you'd always have. You get that in horse and buggy. Even Mother Nature, you buy a puppy and one puppy isn't the same as the other, but you love them all anyway. But that's kind of my bird's eye view.
Tell me about when you have any feeling for why we moved the personnel bunch out to this place, why we did that?
Well, yeah, the reason was that number one, here we were representative of Oldsmobile World Headquarters, and what we had was really a poor um, show, a poor face to anyone coming in. I mean, it was the pits. But now here we have a building that gave off an image of quality, and that basically, I mean, it took all of the departments and had it in one nucleus, and that was good, and we had everyone there. But it's like anything else. If you go into a store and it looks raggy and junky, and I mean, there were papers all over. I mean, it was terrible. You've seen that. No, kind of like it, like 40. I mean, but people from the outside didn't go into 40. It was just a working area. But here we had applicants coming in and interviewees and people coming in, and it was long overdue, and it was fun to plan, and everybody there talk about participation that I have to share with you. Everyone had input into that building.
Okay.
They had employee meetings, and then when they came to color choice, this is your department. What do you want? What these are the colors. Now what do you think of that? And what kind of desk and what kind of. So everyone had input, and it was truly a group effort.
Okay. That was different from previous.
I would say so, yeah. And it would have been, and I'm sure Lewandowski, had he been instrumental in that, because he believed in group effort also. However, when you go back to the other regimes, I would say no. I mean, the decisions would be boom, 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 and that's it, take it or leave it kind of thing. But no, by then, things had changed a little bit. But of course, the group effort couldn't control what was happening in other aspects of the corporation or in the car buying public. And it was, what Jim did, had group meetings, and he would show the film, and it was scary of how the foreign market was pulling and cutting into our market. And it proved, and it has continued. And he had very sobering meetings, and then he would try to promote what you as a person could do, to make your work quality. And everybody's job was important, and we all were cogs in a big wheel, or links in a chain, or whatever you want to call it. So that, I have seen changes while I was there. And
Well, where did Lewandowski come from in his earlier
He was from the
He came
corporation.
from the corporation into the salary personnel
Mhm.
manager's job.
Mhm. And then when he moved in, there was Jim Eckel who came in, and he was also from the corporation.
Okay.
So there was some crossing by then.
Previous to that, you had not seen much of that sort of thing.
Well, I wasn't in a position to see anything like that. I mean, I certainly, in manufacturing, I didn't see any moves. I mean, people were there, and if anyone new came in, I was introduced, but, I wasn't in a position to question or even work with them.
Yeah.
And no, I really can't comment on that because I don't know. I don't know how, the moves were handled. It's like I remember there was a new general manager who came in who died shortly after.
Really?
Yeah, and I was there. I was up on the sixth
Oh,
floor
were you?
at that point. And he seemed like in fact, he'd stop at the desk and
So he
introduce
had arrived at the
himself.
plant.
He arrived at the general manager's
Yeah,
position.
yeah.
And I was sitting I was in that, I would have had to have been I wouldn't have been in that vacation replacement with that year. What year do you remember?
See, that would have been, that was after Belts died.
Mm-hmm. So I would have been in that round robin vacation type of thing, because when I had no assignment, I had a job, a desk right outside the elevator.
Oh.
And I remember him approaching me and asking what my name was. He said, "You're always so pleasant," or something, or maybe he didn't. I don't remember. Maybe I thought I was. But we talked briefly, and then he had the heart attack.
Yeah.
Not as a result of my talk. But then after he came, then it would have been Carol, wouldn't it? Mr. Cook, Mr. St. Joe. No, someone else, but the corporation has changed, yeah. So, yeah, I guess totally it is different. But
Harriet, over that time continuum, what did you see? Did you see any changes at what I would call I'm going to call it the mechanical aspects of your kinds of jobs? How did machinery change, or not machinery in the plant, but your equipment that you dealt with and worked with, how did that change? You mentioned computers at the tail end.
yeah, right.
What was happening at the start?
There were electric typewriters, of course.
Okay,
So that was a given. The phone, I saw a change in the phone system, going from a very simple push button on hold kind of thing to a more sophisticated conference type that you could handle right there. At the time, when I was working, well, anywhere, I'd say 40 or whatever.
With Harriette M. Roberts of 1724 Sherwood, Williamston, Michigan. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River in Lansing on November 8, 1990. This is tape number 2 of 2 tapes. Okay, back to machinery.
Okay, machinery, we were talking telephones, and by the time I left, it was sophisticated enough where you could handle conference calls on your own phone. switch your phones to another, have someone else answer. What else was there? Automatic dialing, all these, what I call toys, and the mechanics, technicalities. I love them. I just think they're great. And then we had typewriters were electric, and there probably were a few others around, but I didn't see them. But I always had electric typewriter. It was the Selectric, which is
Yeah,
something
right.
like that.
Yeah.
I love them still. But then you get into your sophisticated memory typewriters, and I
Okay.
had a nice one in Personnel that you could put a letter on and change and all. And then came into the computers,
Okay.
and that I think was the most fascinating of all, because with that came mail systems. You could type a letter and send it to whoever was on the mail list. I mean, that was the greatest thing since bubblegum, I thought. And now I don't know what they have. I have a computer at home that I have fun with. Like I say, I was born just too soon, just too soon. So you see a change from the time, when I started working, but I did not come out of school. I mean, I had worked
Yeah.
a number of years, and one of my first jobs, not relating to Oldsmobile, was for the Detroit Ordnance Department. It was a government.
Okay.
And we had manual typewriters. There were 2 electric in the whole place, and they went to the big shot secretaries. And then, and this was like 1950s. So you see, from the 50s to the 80s and 90s, there's just been a wonderful change. Even though, the cellular phones, and by the time I left, of course, I always had a long arm. I could find someone no matter where or how. But they have the phones in the car. I mean, that was another boondoggle. I thought that was great. The only thing is it worked the other way. The boss would always
They
call
could
back.
call you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think those things are great. And yes, I did see a big change in the technology. And not only the equipment, the telephone, the typewriter, and I don't know what else.
Reproduction machinery.
Yes, that's another. Uh, I remember a job in my early years working in a department where I would crank out
Mimeograph.
or
Okay.
mimeograph or whatever they call it.
The blue thing.
Yeah, the blue. I guess they called
Multilab.
them. And then there was something else too, I don't know, with the yellow paper, and you'd shove it through and all this kind of stuff. And now, if you don't put it on your computer, you can go to a Xerox machine and you can get whatever wonderful quality. They have color now, and I don't know that they have them in the office. I'm
What did
sure
you
they
have
do.
when you first came to Building 60 over there? Did they have duplicating machines?
No,
in
we
the
would make,
60s?
no, young man. Yes, they did have to, because I remember a comment Mr. Morris said one time when everybody was running to the Xerox machine, or what, it wasn't Xerox, it was a duplicating machine to make copies. And he says, whatever happened to carbon paper? Did that go out with nickel beer? Because that was more expensive, and but in the certainly in the 50s, they didn't have that. And you would, and being in a government job, you'd have to make 8 copies with carbon paper and erase and go through each one and have a little cardboard so it doesn't, the griddle doesn't fall in there. So how we survive, you do survive. I mean, I must have had strong hands, because I would pound that typewriter and get everything out, and then you think back years before that, how they did that. So electric typewriters were very much a relief. And people loved them. The secretaries, they were mostly the women. And what was your question then? We went from the electric typewriters to the duplicating. Then that's what you were. What did we have? And you didn't. You didn't have it. And then when they came in, there came the duplicating machines, and the shredders were right there too. So that was, you would shred sensitive
But
material.
like when you were at 60, you don't remember very many.
No. No. And they, see, because I remember that at the corporation, but they had already a different level. See, it probably didn't reach down into a division. No, I don't remember having one at all over there. It was in 70.
When you got over 70, you started to find
Yeah.
those.
And they might have certainly, we had, at that point, had to use the printing department because we had news releases.
Okay, when you were making
So,
quantities.
yeah, and to send out to the newspapers and magazines, it would be, that's right, we'd have to have a print order, typed one, proofed, and taken down to the printing department. That's how we did that, now that I recall.
But regular letters that you type where you needed carbons, you would
That's
just.
what we
you
used.
just carbon.
Yeah.
You didn't have the paint stuff that you painted out.
Well, no, because that wouldn't work I mean, you had that if you were doing an original for a printing process, but if you were doing a letter to send out to someone, you certainly wouldn't use that. And if I remember, I forget the two of the engineers that they would, when I went to 40, I did some typing and then they took that white stuff and put it
Painted
on
over.
there. And then they returned it to me. I said, "Don't touch my typing." And then they would laugh. I said, I'll make the correction because I wanted it done perfectly in my way. So they did after that. But yeah, we use that white out. So times have changed, and I feel proud and privileged that I was a part of that whole scene. And I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed my work years. But I was ready to.
When did you retire?
I retired like about 4 years ago.
Okay, so that would be like 1986.
Yeah, something like that. I don't worry about dates anymore.
Yeah, well,
But and I took an early retirement, and but I was ready because I was ready to do other things. And how Providence works, there was a reason that I retired, and it's good. My life is good.
yeah.
So I have a lot to be grateful for and a lot to be thankful for. I did not come in out of school. I was in my early 30s
Yeah.
when I came. And I always, for a long time, considered myself a new employee, until I couldn't, that wouldn't wash. But I met wonderful, it's still know wonderful people from it, as you must know. And
Who was your best boss in all that time?
well, I couldn't commit to that. I don't care, alive or dead. I really loved them all. I had good feelings. And it's hard to say a best or a worst. I mean, they're just
They're all
different
different.
levels. Yeah, right. And it's like children. How what's your best child? You can't say that. You're different. And I liked them all. I really did.
Okay.
And I'm hopeful that I left something good behind me.
Can you think of any what I would call unusual happenings that happened while you were in any of those positions, or
Well, not unusual.
antidotes or
Little
things?
fun things, like with the funny things, like with the mouse. It
Yeah,
always
the
seemed
mouse
that,
thing.
people were always had a sense of humor. Um, I suppose if I were to sit and think deja vu or reach way back, I could find a lot of stuff. But right now I can't. And but it was good, and every day was good, and those were the kind of years, though, Jim, when you'd come to work whether you felt like it or not. I mean, if you felt like you had a cold and you think, oh, would I love to stay home? You just didn't. I mean, there were days when I'd go in there dragging, not feeling really good. And I think that's what's missing, the commitment today. And I'm sure the folks who have it are going to rise. That's the cream. They're going to rise to the top. And I'm not saying beat yourself over the head. And if you're sick and you got 102 temperature, you should go to work. Although I was stupid in a lot of ways, I'd go in there dragging. Then finally, well, what'd you come in for? Why are you spreading this stuff around? Go home. But we had, like at Plant 2, there was another nucleus. It was like a group unto itself, and they had their medical department right down there, and it was just like, I suppose, engineering is today, the engineering building. It was just a group in itself, and And each one had something different and something to offer and something to accept.
When you were at Plant Two, did you stay there for lunch? You mentioned you went out when you were at 60.
Yeah, I went out at 60, I went out at 70, it depends, and sometimes I would go into Plant Two,
The cafeteria.
yeah,
Cafeteria.
well, I always make friends with the cafeteria person because I'm such a chow hound, and she would, especially when she'd make special stuff and like deep fried, what did I love so much? Deep fried cauliflower, which is really great for the cholesterol. But I'd go in there and then, but we had a running thing going with the guys would come in, and of course they'd have grease on their clothes, and then they'd sit on the chair and then they'd want to find it and then complain, well, gee, there are no chairs to sit down. And the ladies would come in with their dresses, you know how that always goes. But it would be, it was handled and we would go and eat. And if we had visitors, they'd certainly eat there. And or sometimes I just leave the plant, and I didn't like to stay in my office because I never really had a lunch hour. Then somebody would always come in and talk or ask for something, which is okay. But sometimes I'd shop because you had an hour, which is a lot. And Lansing is small enough where you could drive all over.
Sure.
Now I moved to a smaller town where you,
Where
of course,
really
well, you can drive all over, but I can't walk because I'm out on the perimeter, and for walking town, it's like a couple miles up a hill and stuff, so I don't do that. But you need a car, and I, of course, have my Oldsmobile, and that's kind of, I can't recall anything that would be at this point, but save that tape, maybe I'd be,
we do.
yeah,
We'll always be there. Should
Yeah.
something else come up sometime you want to
share with you.
Big man to stick it on.
Yeah, but there were just, I have just a lot of good things, good memories. So,
That's
and
great.
that's it. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.